Okay. All right. I think we got enough people. I will get started with the starting part. Gail, or who is doing this? Lisa or Gail? Whomever, are you ready?
Yes, it's Lisa who's
Go ahead. I see her nodding. Okay, great. All right. Good evening, everyone. It is February 14th, 2022. It's 5:32 p.m. I'd like to call to order the special board meeting of the Oak Park and River Forest High School Board of Education. On July 23rd, 2021, Governor Fiscal issued a gubernatorial disaster proclamation, finding the disaster exists within the state of Illinois. As a result, we are meeting virtually this evening and convening a remote meeting. We continue to operate under the disaster declaration related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Based on the current public health concerns, I, Sarah Spivey, as head of the public body, don't believe it's either practical or prudent to hold an in-person meeting of the Board of Education on today's date, and I further believe that it's neither practical nor prudent for the public to be present at the public body's regular meeting location. And we will continue to hold meetings with updated practices to comply with Public Act 101-640, signed by Governor Pritzker in August of 2020. So, Gail, or Lisa, sorry, excuse me, Lisa, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Kofsky, Dr. Maharaj,
Here.
Mr. Arkin,
Here.
Mr. Henry,
Here.
Mr. Martiri,
Here.
Ms. Harris,
Here.
and Ms. Spivey.
I am here as well. Thank you. All right. So we have public comments this evening. I believe we have about, just for our board members, about 10 public comments that will be live and a couple that were emailed, 2 or 3. So we should be fine on our time limit. We have a 30-minute public comment period. That is pursuant to board policy. Forgive me, I'm blanking on the number and I'm looking for it here. Pursuant to board policy, which can be found in our 2:230 is the policy. Additionally, there's a couple issues that I've heard about that I kind of want to mention before public comment, because I think that might affect how some commenters want to comment, I suppose. First of all, there is no action pending tonight. I just want to be clear about that. Tonight's discussion only. Were there to be a vote, which there is not, on the facilities plan or on any financing issues, that would be clearly listed in the agenda. And tonight, if you look at a discussion item, it's 4A. It's facilities master plan and framework for financial decision-making that is simply up for discussion. So anyone who is interested in, weighing in on the issue is more than welcome to as these discussions go on, but they are ongoing. There is no final decision that will be made this evening about any of this. In fact, this is the first of many conversations I anticipate about this issue. The second issue concerns the committee of the whole meeting last month, so a month ago, about the 10-year master facilities plan. In that, there was an item that was entitled pool and locker rooms for $46 million. And this perhaps was not, we should have perhaps reiterated this at that meeting. That is presuming that there is no project 2 and that the facilities are renovated sort of in situ, right? That we renovate the existing structure. That is why the price tag is so high. Anyone who lives in Oak Park probably knows how expensive it is to renovate old structures. There was additional information that has been shared with this board and that's in tonight's agenda packet that indicates a $14 million price on the pool. That is $14 million out of the total budget for Project 2, which is $64 million, if I'm not mistaken, because Project 2 is much more than a pool. It is administrative spaces, it's renovating gymnasiums, etc. So I just wanted to kind of mention those 2 things. And with that, I think, Lisa, we can start public comments. Who is the first public commenter? We will elevate that individual to a panelist and they can unmute and begin their public comments. I will keep time. And there is a 3-minute time limit for public comment. It's not meant to be a conversation with the board, although if questions are asked, we will do our best to respond to any questions posed within the next couple of weeks via email. We'll follow up. So with that, Lisa, whenever you're ready to start, we're ready.
Okay. Our first speaker of tonight is Ms. Monica Sheehan.
Yes, good evening. Thank you.
According to the documents in the agenda, the administration has two main goals. The first one is to get you, the school board, to commit to Imagine's Project 2. Its largest component is the 600-seat natatorium and the 37-meter or 40-yard by 25-yard pool. It's twice as large as a standard-size high school competition pool. It's a huge aquatic center, and it's the driver for the proposed demolition of the southeast corner of the structurally sound building. The other elements in the project could be achieved through renovation, no demolition needed. The administration is alleging that the aquatic center makes up just $14 million of the project's estimated $65 million price tag. The administration wants you to believe the other elements in the project tally $50 million. Clearly, that makes no sense. Bottom line, Imagine's pool and natatorium are inequitable in terms of cost and size and need to be right-sized. They do not align with your strategic plan policy to, quote, make fiscally responsible student-centered decisions that allocate resources to ensure excellence and equity for all, end quote. The administration's second goal is to get you to commit to a scheme to fund Project 2, which would enable you to bypass taxpayers. But you know that's wrong. 3 of you sat on the 2015 board and voted to bypass taxpayers on a $37.5 million Olympic-sized pool. All 3 of you publicly stated later that you regretted that vote and you would not make that mistake again. The rest of the sitting board members said during their campaigns that they would not bypass taxpayers on funding a pool. The administration wants you to break your word. Voters expect you to keep it. Funding for major capital projects should go on the ballot for taxpayers' approval, and if approved, the cost will be spread out over 20 years to those taxpayers who would benefit from it. That's best practice, and that's what you should follow, not another scheme from the administration. On page 12 of the financial document, it states that D200 is running a non-capital structural surplus of $8 to $10 million annually. That means that you are still levying too much money from taxpayers. That needs to be corrected. This board should only levy for what it needs, and major capital projects should go on the ballot. Thank you very much for your time and your service.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Marty Bernstein. If you would, thank you. You can start whenever you're ready.
Hello, gang, old members, new members. You can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. The facilities master plan at Project 2, the $14 million that's stated versus the $64.5 million for the whole project. So that leaves $50 million. You take a generous $15 million for the elevator and the gyms and all the other stuff. That leaves $35 million. What's that $35 million for? What it's for is the demolition and construction of a new building that's not necessary. What you need to do is build one 25-yard pool where the 2 old pools are. That is sufficient for Oak Park and River Forest High School needs of the school. People like Tops and anyone else from the outside who want to use a pool, they can go find it someplace else. I don't think it's in anyone's interest to spend $35 million extra so people who are not associated with the school can use a pool. Let's see. The next steps section, there's 5 bullet points. Sarah, thanks for your comments at the beginning. It's good to know that we're just talking at this point. But even the way those 5 points are written out, number 4 and number 5 should be 1 and 2. You can't do any of those other 3 bullet points without having a plan that a cost estimate can be developed off of. It's 2 years into the pandemic. It's going to be, what, a year or 2 before anything could possibly happen. Probably just getting to a good estimate. What's it going to be? $65 million? I don't think so. So I wanted to mention that. You need to reverse those 2 things. Again, the issue about the $14 million and the $46 million, reading the agenda, I find it misleading. As Monica was saying, District 200 wants to go around the taxpayers. the current estimate of $64.5 million is already 50% higher than the plan that went to referendum and lost 6 years ago. It is incumbent upon you to have the whole community involved in this, and that means a referendum. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I might be wrong about this, but reading what I was reading, it seems to me that from that language that the board is acting or looking at acting more of a rubber stamp than actually doing some research. And when this all came about, the idea was that Imagine would put together their plan, which in my mind is basically a list of things that can be done, not a project plan or anything like that. And the idea was that the board, the 3 members who were there then and the 4 newer members, you people need to take a real deep dive into each one of these projects. You need to do your own research, and you need to come up with questions of your own. You need to hear us, you need to hear the people that are, for all those things. But you really have to be the people driving what's happening beyond Project 1. And you need to do that. Let's see. You're planning on running a balance of about 110% a year of a year's expenses for the next 5 or 6 years.
Sorry to interrupt. At 3 minutes, if you're almost finished, if you could wrap it up, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, I think I just have 1 or 2 more. Do not go into debt of any kind for anything at this point in time with the amount of money that we have. It doesn't make any sense. The CDC voted unanimously not to recommend it, and I can't see anyone on this board doing the same. Thanks for your time. Nice to see you guys all again.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Judith Alexander.
Thank you. I and many other taxpayers don't trust you to be good financial stewards of our money. Why would that be? Well, I recognize that many of you weren't involved in this, but in 2005, D200 exploited a tax loophole to raise taxes substantially without a referendum. This gave you a cash reserve of 130 million, which is now about 96 million. Then in 2015, the D200 board voted to issue non-referendum bonds to pay for a 23-lane pool. A successful petition drive forced a referendum. In 2016, our referendum to fund an 18-lane pool was defeated. Since that time, I'm sorry to say you've done little to earn our trust. You're still attempting to build an oversized pool and avoid a referendum. You may again be considering non-referendum debt, this time in the form of 20 million in debt certificates. Perhaps you quietly gave up on this maneuver after your finance committee unanimously voted against it, but you're still contemplating a maximum tax increase of 5% when you don't need the money. You may be, I am confused about the price of the pool versus the rest of Project 2. It seems, however, that that amount may be lowballed in the attachments to tonight's agenda. It seems like you're trying to minimize public comment. This meeting was scheduled at the last minute for Valentine's Day evening. Other than Christmas Eve, it's hard to imagine a time when taxpayers are less likely to attend. And D200 didn't inform the public of the Community Finance Advisory Committee meeting on January 18th, when debt certificates were discussed. Finally, you're not living up to your own stated equity goals. Out of approximately 3,300 OPRF students, there are only about 100 students who are aquatic team members. The proposed 17-lane pool and 600-seat stadium are clearly for their benefit. Certainly nothing of such magnitude is required for classes. And in fact, a standard size high school competition pool is only half that size. The high school's largest team, track and field, is not only crammed into the field house, but displaced when other teams need to use it. Your aquatic team members are almost all white. Your track and field teams are among the most racially diverse. Inequitable on 2 scores. Enough said? Trying to avoid a referendum is just wrong, and it will only increase community mistrust of D200. I urge you to reject the administration's unnecessary 5% property tax hike, to use existing cash reserves to pay for maintenance projects, to right-size Project 2's pool and seating, and to put it to referendum. Simply put, this is the right.
We're past 3 minutes. If you're almost ready, if you could wrap up, please.
Yes, simply put, this is the right and the ethical way to go. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Candaya Kanagandram.
Oh, hi. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'll keep it short and sweet. It's basically along the same lines as the previous speaker. Basically, asking you all to not proceed ahead with project 2 and right size the pool. And then the second motion is to go to referendum as opposed to issuing bonds though. Because it's a big spend and I'm looking to keep my tax bill on a consistent basis. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Lisa Reed.
Hello, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. I know you're excited to be here like I am. I'm Lisa Reed. I am a proud OPRF parent. And just a couple things on this framework for decision-making. First off, I want to say I applaud you for a recommendation to get detailed costs for phase 2, because so much has changed since the beginning. So again, affirm and applaud. Let's see what the real numbers are that we're talking about. And then once we know what those real numbers are that we're talking about, as a board, you guys may decide on the prioritization of this phase versus other phases. So again, applaud on getting the phases. The other thing I want to applaud is, I know this board and the previous board, maybe the one before that, I don't remember, has worked very hard to build trust with the community. I know that you haven't taken the maximum levy that you've in the past. You've been transparent about the reserve and trying to, what's the right size of the reserve. And I know that is an active conversation. The reason why I'm speaking, in addition to affirming on both of those, is also to an ask. An ask is to please continue to build that trust and listen to the finance committee and think very hard about whether maneuvers, which I know are legal, such as the 20 million in debt certificates, is that really the way to go? I know I'm putting the cart before the horse because you're going to get the detailed cost and then decide what's the right approach. So I get that. However, this board, previous board, has worked so hard to build trust with the community. And I would ask that if in fact more money is needed to do the next phases of Imagine, that you really look to see what's the right way to engage the community in that conversation so that we don't go backwards on trust, but we continue to go forward as one OPRF, one community. Thank you again, and have a good Valentine's Day. Good night.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Kitty Conklin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, although I no longer live in Oak Park, some friends who still live in Oak Park asked me if I would review the framework for financial decision-making document that is included in tonight's agenda. One of the reasons I was asked is because somebody seemed to recall that in April 2019, I made public comment when the board switched from accrual to cash basis accounting. That comes up in my comment tonight. I think from looking at the framework document, I think it's got a couple of flaws to it. And this may or may not be because of a jumping back and forth between cash basis and accrual accounting. It seems to me like 25 million of the Project 1 expenses don't get captured at all on any of the financial slides. 13 million is captured on slide 5 through the expenses of 19, 20, and 21, but the other 25 million is missing. Depending on which accounting method is used, the 25 million should either be in a balance sheet accrual account, or it should show up as a reduction in slide 6's fund balances, all funds for year 2021. The reduction should also carry over to the calculations in the decision-making process, slide 11. Until that 25 million is accounted for, I would hold slide 11 calculations as questionable. Secondly, there's no clear definition of or distinction made throughout the document between routine operations and maintenance expenses and capital expenses. And consequently, I believe that non-capital expenses, as well as capital letters, major capital expenses, could be misstated throughout the amounts provided. The misstatement will in turn result in inaccurate annual surpluses. Has D200's accounting and audits policy 4:80, which defines a capitalization threshold, been applied consistently to all the numbers? If so, that should be clarified, but it should at a minimum be verified. I suggest, based on the amounts reported on slide 5 as major capital expenses, that some routine operations and maintenance has been captured and capitalized, and accordingly, again, surpluses are overstated. Slides 9 to 12 make very clear that D200 is currently generating some level of operating surplus. Depending on fund balance, D200 will also need to manipulate future tax levies to ensure future surpluses will continue occurring so that you can support a given level of capital spending. The slides make
3 minutes. If you wouldn't, if you could wrap up, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, I know that D200 will also be reviewing its fund balance policy. I suggest that one other policy be considered, which defines who is required to approve capital expenditures. For example, regular operation and maintenance like painting would be approved by the administration, major HVAC repairs by the board, and finally, certain capital expenses should be approved by taxpayers. Please consider reviewing the document and considering a new policy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Jack Powers.
Mr. Powers, you can unmute and begin your public comment if you'd like.
Unmute. I'm here.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you. I fully agree with renovating the pools. I don't understand why anybody would seriously be contemplating developing so much capital and so much space to a single sport with so few participants on a landlocked school. It just escapes me how that would ever happen, much less this issue continue to roil for the past 7 or 8 years. It's beyond me to understand. But I had a conversation a couple of summers ago with a board member at the time, now off the board, who explained that the board typically just reacts to the agenda items presented to it by the district, by the administration, and decides those issues. And my comment back to this person was, the role of a board is to provide direction to the administration, not take direction from them. So I don't know if that's the dynamic in general, but that's the perception I had at the time. But getting to my real point, so as you're thinking about how to spend and what to spend it on, there were 2 recent referendums in Oak Park Advisory that dealt with spending. One of them, these are both from November of 20, shall the operating cash balances of local Oak Park governments be limited to 1/2 year's operating expenses as measured by at the start of the fiscal year, and with the excess returned as soon as possible to taxpayers through temporarily lowered taxes. The result was 74.27% of voters, almost 16,000 people, voted in favor of that statement and that policy. And then going further, for the Illinois State Board of Education, D200 only needs to keep about 20 million in reserve to satisfy its minimum requirements to earn the highest financial rating, and it has 96 million. The second referendum was, shall any capital expenditure of 5 million or more by any local taxing body within Oak Park be subject to a binding referendum for approval or rejection by the voters. The result of that was 77.24%, or about 16,500 voters felt that capital expenditures should go to a referendum when they exceed 5 million. District 200 in 2016 paid a company called Fiscal Research and Strategies to complete a community survey about replacing the pools at the high school. The results of that survey were, as the cost went up, decidedly less interest in the pool. The $68 million version of the pool that was proposed at that time only garnered 27% interest for it, 69% against, and 4% undecided. That's approximately what you're intending or are proposing to build with the current plan in phase 2, at somewhere around the 65 million mark, which the pool might be 14 million, but in order to put the pool there, you got to spend a lot more to get it to where you can put the pool where the field house was. Then in 2013, the board commissioned Stantec Consulting Services to review the pool issue, and it produced a report in which it recommended one 8-lane, 25-yard standard size high school competition pool.
Powers, you're at 3 minutes. If you wouldn't mind wrapping up, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, they recommended an 8-lane, 25-yard standard size pool in the East Pool, South Pool place to replace the 2 existing schools. Stantec stated that the school's current 11 swim lanes are a luxury for a high school. That report was ignored and replaced with the Imagine Committee. Why would they have ignored it? So you're considering taking on debt with inferior vehicles for doing that at higher interest rates that are going to cost you over $300,000 a year. You could take that $300,000 and tutor a lot of kids.
Mr. Powers, if you want to take the remainder of your comments and send them to us in an email, we'd be happy to review them.
Sure, I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Brian Souters.
Hi. I will stay at 3 minutes. I did a word count. So look, like the other speakers, I still believe that D200 has a broken relationship with the community, especially when it comes to finance, as if all the maneuvers need to be done in spite of the community, not in partnership of it. And looking over these documents and the ones that were with the financial committee, I mean, you start to see a roadmap take shape, which is to continue to keep taking a surplus in taxes, choose to keep a 50% reserve fund, which everyone says, is twice as much as the State Board of Education recommends. Then you can okay facility project 2 using the reserve funds and the surplus without having to go to the community for approval. And then when the surplus and the remaining reserve don't cover the full costs, that's when you get the okay to raise our taxes the max 5%, again, without approval. And then you get the athletic building, you get a max money and all without having to go to the community. And I know that it sounds conspiratorial or dramatic, but if you look on slide 8 of the one deck for tonight's meeting, it recommends that the 2 primary objectives driving your financial decisions are the desired fund to balance target and a desire to address capital projects without debt or a referendum. So the entire district community financial relationship is right there on that one slide. Throughout the whole deck, there's not a word about sustainable tax levels or excellence in education. There's not a word about the fairness after overtaxing us for the last 17 years and creating a massive surplus. The only reference to the community is the part where they recommend solutions that avoid any accountability to the community in making these facility decisions. As you move forward, I'd like to see just 2 very basic values to connect back to the community, which is first, it's irresponsible. And in my point of view, it's immoral for government to take more money from people than it needs. There should be no surpluses and there should be no reserves, right? This is money that we make and that you take, and that if you're not going to do anything with it and you're going to hang on to it, we should have that money to get tutoring for our kids or after school or retirement. And, and I'm not sure if the district's objective is to educate kids or capture maximum revenue from taxpayers, because that line is in all of the documents. Second, I think the district should never, ever be looking for ways to spend money that bypass community input or approval. I'm sure that you and your consultants all say that you can do this. It's been in all the memos, in the headlines. These are the ways that you can raise money and spend money without getting approval. I just would like to see this board start to repair the relationship with the community and get back to basics. Tax us only for what the school really needs, no surpluses. If we need to pay more for teachers or we need to upgrade facilities, make a plan, sell us the plan, not like the previous plans where there's scheming and misinformation. Give us no BS, have us vote on the plan, and then once the plan's over, live with the results. don't put in the memo that, hey, 38 votes is all that did the pool, so that's what we need to do. It's the only referendum in 30 years that's ever failed in Oak Park. So live with the results and just please start respecting us in ways that the previous boards have not. You're all generally new. We have some new administrators. Let's not continue the kind of poisonous culture that's been in the past, and move forward and work with the community, not in spite of it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Corey Wesley.
Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
All right. So good evening, board. I'd like to start by thanking you for your service. It's often a thankless job to listen to folks like me tell you how I think you could be doing your job better. So before I start, do know that I appreciate you both volunteering to serve and enduring the service. I'd like to talk about transparency tonight in the hopes that as you discuss and deliberate tonight and over the coming weeks, you keep it and the people you serve in mind. The first goal of any board, I feel, is transparency to the people it serves. We shouldn't have to guess at the motivations of this board. They should be clear, obvious, and well communicated. After reading the presentation on major financial decisions attached to tonight's agenda, I find myself unsure of this board's intention. Is this board attempting to create a financial system that allows it to avoid public referendum and thus approval on all future capital expenditures? And is this board seeking to do that by continuing to run a tax surplus at the expense of the people who are now enduring the second year of a pandemic, as well as rampant inflation? That's the impression that I get from the presentation. To avoid a lack of transparency and to preserve accountability, I'd appreciate if this board would explain the motivations behind this system if and when it adopts it, how it enables transparency rather than diminishes it, and how it benefits the people. As the people's financial guardians, we expect this board to make decisions that are not only in the best interests of the institution and the people, but also sensitive to the environment in which we all live. That environment is currently a pandemic with high inflation. That environment is impacting the people, considering that D200 has a fund balance of over $100 million and has been running a non-capital surplus for the last 5 years. I ask that the board take all of this into account as you have your discussions on whether to eventually vote to run a non-capital surplus in perpetuity or to fund capital improvements unconventionally. One last thing, the same inflation that is impacting the people is impacting the D200 reserve. Our $100 million is making less than 1% in interest based on a recent board meeting, but inflation in January was reported at 7.5%. The longer we hold on to this reserve, the less it's worth. The less it buys, the worse it spends. Running an informal inflation calculator shows that we might have lost as much as $18 million in spending power over the time that we've held onto our substantial reserve. Please consider this as you make your future plans as well. Thank you for your time, your transparency, and your service.
Thank you. Our last speaker, John Duffy.
Good evening, everyone. Before I started, I'd like to say something about what I'm addressing and where it came from. I'm addressing primarily the strategic plan and the racial equity policy and procedures. I was on the steering committee in 2012. It's almost 10 years ago when the district made a commitment to plan for racial equity deliberately. And goal 6 takes that into account, the strategic plan. I was there for the reboot. I worked on the task force on teaching and learning. I was there for every meeting of the committee that drafted, community committee and faculty administration that drafted the racial equity policy, and the same thing held true for procedures. I worked on that with Dr. Ammons diligently. And it's that context that I address you tonight. As a member of C, we want to make a plea that you keep equity and student need, particularly academic and social and emotional need, at the forefront of budget decision-making. Now, the implication is that you can do both. But if you don't follow your own procedures that you unanimously signed on to, I don't see how you can do it. We were here on February 3rd, and we praised the board for fulfilling part of the dual action called for under goal 6 of the strategic plan. It prioritizes equitable outcomes by making, quote, fiscally responsible student-centered decisions regarding facilities and finances. That's page 13 of the current plan. We remind you that there are two interfacing parts to financial decision-making. Full attention to both capital improvements and student day-to-day social, emotional, academic, and co-curricular needs, as students and adults recently expressed in their challenge to closing down co-curricular activities in December. We need to be looking at both at once. They are the same part, just different sides of the coin. We maintain that decisions about funding the balance of Project 1 and the work on Project 2 of the plan must be accompanied by parallel documents. We're talking about precise documents. What are the projections for staffing? What are the projections for special needs support, especially around the freshman restructuring? We have no idea what those costs are going to be, but we do know that Goal 6 requires the district to allocate resources to ensure excellence and equity. This action embodies the core prescription of the racial equity policy that, quote, decisions made regarding the allocation of resources shall be filtered through the racial equity analysis tool. That is the heart and soul. And I'm going to wrap it up, Sarah. Nobody's talking about this, so give me a moment. We've pledged to become a model district for equity in all forms. If we don't start looking at programs directed at students and finances, and by the way, the more I learn about this, the more doubtful I become, but I know there's a reply to a lot of the things that have been said at the last two meetings. Unless we start doing that, you're not only going to lose faith in the people who are concerned about taxation, which I am, paid tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars over 45 years. We are going to lose faith in the people who stood behind and worked so hard for racial equity, because it doesn't seem to be a factor in your decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I believe that concludes public comment. Is that accurate, Lisa?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So our only item tonight is the facilities master plan and framework for financial decision making. I will turn it over to you, Dr. Johnson.
All right, thanks a lot, Sarah, appreciate it. So as we go into this conversation, we have kind of two parts to what we're gonna kind of go through to, frame the conversation. First, we're gonna talk about our facilities itself, and I wanna introduce that in a pretty specific way in a moment. Then Ron Anderson and I are gonna talk a little bit about the facilities from kind of an overview perspective before turning it over to Rob Grossi to talk about the framework for financial decision-making, at which point we'll open it up for the conversation we want and need as a community. So first things first, though, I want to thank the Board of Education for convening this special meeting to focus on where we are with our facilities. As the work of Imagine OPRF Project 1 approaches completion, this is absolutely the right time to continue holding open discussions about, first, how to adapt our vintage building to meet the needs of our students, and second, how we can do so in a fiscally responsible manner, which is of course essential for us as a district. There's no doubt about it. These are thorny challenges to navigate, and naturally, they spark significant discussion in our community. And that's a good thing. As we continue on with this conversation, we need community engagement to continue. It's invaluable to help guide our thinking. And this is important because the needs are very real. We have a 1 million square foot building that was constructed in a patchwork of 13 different sections between 1907 and 1967. When teaching and learning looked very different than it does today. Fortunately, we have a roadmap thanks to the important work that Imagine OPRF work group did. And I want to be very clear before I continue that this district remains committed to the work that Imagine started. In 2017, Imagine OPRF was charged by the board with making recommendations for a comprehensive, fiscally responsible facilities plan that would support equity and current and future academic programming needs. It was based on the premise that our students deserve, and it is our responsibility to deliver the highest quality learning environment we can for the students in this community. Toward that end, the 40-member work group, 2/3 of whom were community members, spent roughly a year and a half conducting a rigorous needs assessment using surveys, focus groups, tours of peer schools, and public engagement sessions. They collected data from hundreds of students, teachers, staff members, coaches, club sponsors, parents, and community members. In November of 2018, the Imagine OPRF work group made its recommendation to the board for a 5-phase long-term capital projects plan. The board accepted those recommendations and affirmed the identified facility needs. It also approved the first phase of that work, Imagine Project 1, and as a result, we now have more welcoming, student-focused learning spaces centrally located in the core of that building, And that brings us to Imagine OPRF Project 2. This project focuses on building a new 4-story physical education and athletics wing to replace the southeast corner of the building. We'll talk a little bit more about that later tonight. This southeast wing supports the underlying philosophy of our physical education curriculum, which is to engage students in as many different physical activities as possible during their 4 years here, so that they have a wide range of options for lifetime fitness. We have a robust PE curriculum here at OPRF, and yes, that does include swimming. The pool is a classroom where every year roughly 1,600 students participate in swimming during the school day. And as one of few non-weight bearing physical activities, as well as being a life-saving skill, swimming is and will remain an essential part of the OPRF physical education curriculum. As we begin the discussion tonight, I want to clarify the relationship between Project 2 and the 10-year maintenance plan, which is also in tonight's packet. Previously, the 10-year maintenance plan included items that would need to be addressed if the district does not move forward with Project 2. For instance, a previous version, as you heard in comments tonight and has been referenced elsewhere, the previous version of the maintenance plan listed a very rough estimate of about $46 million that goes back several years to replace the 2 pools in their current locations. This is very different from the cost of including a single new pool as part of the comprehensive renovations outlined in Project 2. In order to make our documents as clear as possible, we've realigned the maintenance plan so it serves as a companion to Project 2. Therefore, it includes only items not addressed by that project. So where does this leave us? In 2018, Project 2 was projected to cost about $64.5 million. Of that total amount, the aquatics portion of the southeast wing was estimated to cost $14 million. Again, these are estimate numbers, as no full design has ever been completed for Project 2, and they should be considered as placeholders until we're able to verify these costs and do the important work to get us there. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Ron Anderson so we can begin our conversation tonight. But as we head into the conversation, both for the community and for our board right now, I invite everybody to continue to consider Project 2 from 4 perspectives. First, from a student learning perspective. How would any planned renovations to our campus affect the student experience, equitably affect the student experience of OPRF students in the years to come? Number 2, from a facilities perspective, how do you recommend we take the work that Imagine started, dust it off, and move toward a more complete design that comes with updated cost estimates? From a financial perspective, how can we best leverage our existing financial resources to make the necessary renovations to our campus? There are several options that have been discussed. We've got a lot of feedback on this specific point, and we need to continue to have these conversations as we make these decisions. And finally, from a community-wide perspective, what's the best way to get meaningful input from our stakeholders on the path forward? We've heard a lot of comments from the community members over the past several weeks. We need to continue to have those comments coming in and inform our path. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ron to begin the conversation based off of the slide deck that was in our packet. So Ron, if you could take it from here, please.
Share my screen. Could everyone see it? I can't see, for some reason I can't see anyone now. So say something if you want to stop me at any point.
We can see it. Thanks, Ron.
Okay, thanks. I also want to thank you for spending a little of your Valentine's Day with me. So this is let me get back over here. All right, starting with the current building. Since 1907, we've added 12 additions to the building. Is this scrolling on its own?
Ron, I'm not sure who's driving. I think, are you sharing your screen or is Lisa sharing her screen?
Who's sharing?
Yeah.
I shared mine. Let me close mine so I can watch what Lisa's doing.
Okay.
Are you driving, Lisa?
Yep.
Okay, let me get you, move that to the screen there. Give me 1 second. Sorry for looking this way. I have two screens right here. I gotta go to Lisa's screen. Okay, since 1907, we've added 12 additions to the building, and the SRC became the 13th addition to that building. I hope you had a few moments to view that, and you'll see them all with 1907 building being in the middle. Can you go to the next slide, please? The facilities master plan consists of three components. We have our annual equipment and furniture replacement, our 10-year maintenance plan, which is attached, our long-term capital plan, which is the Imagine OPRF project 1 through the different phases as listed. Next slide, Lisa. Our annual spending for the equipment replacement for fiscal year 2021 and 22, as you can see, a little bit over 900,000 for the 2020. 2021 was a little bit over 655,000, and 22 was a little bit over 753,000 as budgeted. Also, we spend approximately 500,000 on an annual basis on technology supplies, which is the computers and the one-on-one. Could you go to the next slide, Lisa? Our annual spend has been for the 10-year maintenance plan. Fiscal year 2018 was 3.3, 19, 3.2, 20, 4.5, 21, 7.6, and budget 6.3 for the 22. And also, as we stated, we previously stated, some of these budgets will be a little bit higher because we're bringing monies from the end to now to get rid of some of the deferred maintenance. Could you go to the next slide, Lisa? Now, the 10-year maintenance plan, this is a summary of the 10-year maintenance plan, because we categorized each one of the topics inside the 10-year maintenance plan so that it'd be easier to follow. We listened to the board's concerns on how difficult it was to follow, and you guys wanted to see exactly the flow of it. So we came up with the topics, and each topic has projects within that topic, and is detailed on the budgets within that over the span of 10 years, which the columns going to the right, you'll see all the way to 3031, you can see each of the estimated costs that's associated with those topics, from accessibility, health and life safety, roof repairs. You'll see multiple items within these topics that would give you exactly the idea of what created that estimated cost next to the topic. If you want to see a detailed breakdown of that, we also attach that to this agenda. Lisa, can you go to the next slide? Imagine OPRF project 1 still consists of, because it's still going on to 2023, the replacement of the South Cafeteria, the Student Resource Center, which is the second floor, the main interest and welcome center, the student commons, special education offices and conference rooms, a total of 80 classrooms. 65 of them was renovations, and 15 new classrooms that are replacing the old library and the tutoring centers. Driver's education rooms, the mail room, duplicating room was moved from one side of the building to the other side of the building. An ADA compliant elevator, that's the elevator that's inside of the new SRC building. And also the freight elevator being converted into a ADA compliant elevator that will serve a dual purpose of a freight elevator and passenger elevator. Could you go to the next slide, Lisa? The project 1 expenditures, the cost to date, 24 million, remaining costs, a little bit over 14 million, with a total cost of 38.7. Could you go to the next slide, Lisa? Dr. Johnson will go over project 2 and the next steps.
Yeah, I'm just going to do this very, very quickly now at this point. I'm not going to read, through everything that's on this list, because the items that are in project 2 are extensive, and you can all see them here and take a look at it on your own. But it was helpful when I've been in conversations over the past several weeks with folks in the school and in the community. to take a look at exactly what we're talking about. We can talk about, renovations to our campus, but until we, take a look at what our campus is and the exact place we're looking at, it's hard to, it can be hard to know. So if I could have, Lisa, if you could click on the Imagine OPRF Project 2 link at the top, yes. Okay, these are documents that go back to the Imagine work group. And sometime between now and whenever, they're gonna load. All right, good. So this is, which initially when this came out in 2018, you see in the top corner, left corner there, this is described as sequence 2. If you're on our website, you'll see the exact same thing, this reference to sequence 2. And that is what we have really described as a district for the past several years, really the past 2 or 3 years, as project 2. Okay, so for moving forward, the word sequence and the word project in the context of the Imagine OPRF Imagine OPRF work is synonymous. All right, so what you see down here with this map here, west is pointing, west is up in this regard, east points to the bottom, and north is right, of course, and south is left. And so what you see down here in the southeast corner of the building, this is where the athletic director's office currently is. You have the area outlined there, kind of highlighted in blue, that was recommended to be raised and reconstructed for the various purposes that you see here. What you see here is what would be the lower level, the pool tank that's needed for that, as well as needed changing facilities and mechanicals. Again, that's below ground level, okay? That's again from 2018. Let's go to the next slide and take a look at the first floor here. There we go. Thanks, Lisa. A little bit, there we go, perfect. So what we see here is the first floor on which the pool would exist. And what you see here is, if you can look, you see lanes in the bottom left corner of what's highlighted there. There are some lanes that go north-south, that is left to right on our screen. There are 8 of those right there. Okay, and what would be the main competition part of this pool, again, as designed by Imagine, not vetted with a full process and all that business, but this was what was sketched out really at this point. An 8-lane pool right there, and on the right-hand side, you see 3 lanes to the right that go actually east to west. That is in the area that would be a diving well. And so during competitions, you'd have a diving well going on as well as the swimming in the 8 lanes. And when you don't have diving going on, there would be 11 lanes available for practices or whatever. So that's what you see there. And you see the other areas that are renovated as well. Multi-purpose rooms, the PE and athletics offices there. And again, sorely needed lockers, and storage. This was something that was consistently identified by students, faculty, community members when they reviewed that campus, that part of our campus. All right, let's go to the second floor if we could. And I'll try to be a little quicker here because there's not as much to talk about. A dance studio is certainly something that we currently enjoy in some places. This allows us to continue that with a space specifically dedicated to that curricular area. You see restroom areas there as well. And this is the area on the second floor here that would be basically open to below, because that would be for spectators. And you see that highlighted there on the top of the screen there, which is in the west area. All right, let's scroll down if we could then. Now to the third floor. The third floor allows us to address multiple athletic needs that would serve our curricular and extracurricular areas. You see 3 basketball courts in the area that is directly above the pool, an improved weight room there, as well as, again, toilets and other spaces that are needed, including, actually, I skipped over an elevator in the previous slides. That's highlighted there as well. So that is a quick overview of what Project 2 is, okay? Again, you can see that in language form on the other slide with a few more details perhaps that I've missed, but this hopefully gives you an idea of what part of the campus we would be talking about with Project 2. All right, so Lisa, you're good. Stop sharing that if you could, and let's go to the next steps. Again, these were referenced before, and nothing too new, right? And not really a bunch of new information in this regard, but what we're talking about really is a need to review our finances and figure out what we really have at our in our fund balance and by any other means to pursue project 2. Before we're really able to go too far into that path, yeah, we need to confirm as a district our commitment to project 2, and then get a little bit more specific in what that means. What exactly is that scope? Go about defining a design, and then develop specific cost estimates before we begin the work, which is something that is needed and a lesson learned from as we had gone through project 1. All right, so with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Rob Grossi at this time to discuss the framework for financial decision-making that is really a necessary sidecar to the facilities conversation. So Rob, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So today's presentation, or tonight's presentation, is not a recommendation. It's more framing, I believe, the district's financial condition and its future and its decision-making process as you make major decisions related to everything that you vote on that's of significance, and how everything is connected, as was mentioned in the public comments. So if you turn to page 3, I'm going to start with the history of the recent financial history of the school district. And this graph right here compares total revenues received, all funds of the district, to what we're calling non-capital expenditures. And by non-capital expenditures, I'm defining that as total expenses in all funds, less capital and equipment expenses charged to the building fund and the capital projects fund. So these bars do include technology expenses and other types of expenses that were charged to the education fund, but they do not include those items that you saw before. So they don't include project 1 expenses. They don't include expenses related to the maintenance plan. Next slide, please. So when you compare the total revenues to the total non-capital expenditures per the district's audit, you could see how the two compare. And we've talked before about why things dropped in 2015 and 16 and why they went back up. But in 2021, you could see that the total revenues exceeded the total non-capital expenditures by a little over $12 million. And again, that's not including any expenditures related to capital projects. Next slide, please. So I think this slide kind of does a good job of showing, hopefully does a good job of showing how the non-capital surplus and your major capital expenditures affect your fund balances. So in 2013, for example, your non-capital surplus was $16,141,000. In that year, the district spent $5,884,000. So the result was that your fund balances increased by $10,257,000. And then we'll jump to 2021. As I mentioned on the previous slide, your non-capital surplus was 12.4, but the district spent $6,042,000 on major capital and $11,780,000 on project 1. So even though your non-capital surplus was $12,420,000, you were required to use $5.4 million of fund balance reserves to break even for the year. So what's left over after you put together your non-capital surplus and your capital expenditures, whether it's plus or minus, impacts your fund balance reserves. So you could see that during this time period, the district has drawn down its fund balance reserves by $18,366,000. Next slide, please. So this graph represents fund balances through per the audit, which is accrual basis, from 2012 through 2020. And you could see that fund balances have decreased by around $18 million, which is from the previous slide is what you spent more than you brought in when you consider your capital expenditures. Now, one of the things, a good question that was asked by Kitty during the public session was whether the additional $25 million of Project One expenditures were in these figures. Those additional $25 million, approximately $25 million, are included because we're using as the starting fund balance, in this example, $80 million, which is basically that 102 million minus the 25 million. But there's some minor adjustments, but essentially, just to give comfort to the Board of Education, the numbers that you're going to see going forward factor in that we have $24.9 million of Project One expenses that will hit future audits. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is how I believe the Board of Education of Oak Park River Forest High School District 200 should consider these major decisions that it's about to face. So the first step I recommend is that the district look at two things. What is your desired fund balance target? Which, in framing that another way, how much of your fund balance reserves are you willing to decrease or take away from your, how much are you willing to decrease your fund balance reserves? And then the second question is the desired amount of capital to address with those fund balance reserves, whatever that number is. Whether it's zero, whether it's, $100 million, how much capital do you wish to address with those fund balance reserves and future fund balance reserves going forward? Next slide, please. So the second question then is to align your major financial decisions with those two objectives. So again, the red has stayed the same. Your two decision points. How much of your fund balance reserves how much do you want to draw down your fund balance reserves, and how much capital do you want to address without debt or without going to referendum? And and then once you have that question, that determines basically how you want to operate your district in terms of your how much non-capital surplus do you want to have. So if, for example, you're willing to draw down your fund balance reserves by 40 million, but you want to address $60 million worth of capital projects, then you have to come up with another $20 million. That's just one example. And I think it's the next slide that will kind of hopefully make it easier to understand. That's the slide after that, sorry. So the third step would be that, okay, then once the Board of Education determines what level of non-capital surplus, again, revenues over expenditures minus your major capital projects, once you've established that target, then the board makes decisions primarily in terms of tax levy and salary and benefit decisions. Your district is a little bit unique in that essentially 80% of your revenues come from your tax levy and 80% of your expenditures come from salaries and benefits. So really the decision you make on your tax levy drives your revenue growth, because most of your other revenue sources, in particular state and federal revenues, are likely not to grow of any substance over the next several years. And then salary and benefit decisions, which includes decisions related to your collective bargaining agreement, decisions related to staffing and things of that sort. So those are your two major financial decisions, and all those decisions are connected. Every decision affects your fund balances. Next slide, please. So here's a couple examples that I put in just hopefully to help illustrate the thought process. So let's take a look at the first column, and let's assume that the Board of Education is willing to bring the fund balance target down to 25%. Now, again, after the remaining Project One costs are spent, you're going to have about $80 million. And again, this is for illustrative purposes only. but you're gonna have about $80 million. So every 25% is $20 million. So if you're willing to get rid of, if you're willing to bring fund balance reserves down to 25%, you have $60 million of additional fund balances that you need to decide what to do with. If your desired capital over the next 10 years is $40 million, and I use that number just as an estimate of let's assume a basic of $4 million a year over the next 10 years, which is pretty much the historical average of your maintenance plan, without any fund balances being used towards project 2 or anything above $4 million a year. So if you're willing to spend $6 million in fund balances, and you only want to address $40 million in capital, you have enough money there to do that. In fact, you have $20 million more than you need to accomplish both of those objectives. And then let's say, hypothetically, again, these are just for examples only, that let's go to the third column. The third column is the Board of Education says we're willing to go to 50% fund balance target, which means, again, if you have $80 million now, you're willing to use $40 million towards capital. But let's say hypothetically, this is not a recommendation, but it's a thought process, that the desired capital expenditures are $110 million. And that's a number that equals the $40 million of capital projects plus an additional $70 million. And I just threw that number in as a hypothetical project 2 type of expenditures. So if the Board of Education decided that we want to bring our fund balance reserves down to 50%, and we're looking for a way to fund project 2 without issuing any bonds and without going to referendum, then you're $70 million short of that target, because you're willing to commit $40 million worth of fund balance reserves, but you want to spend 110, so you're $70 million short. And if you wanted to come up with that $70 million, again, without borrowing or without going to referendum, you'd have to come up with $70 million over the next 10 years, which would be an average of $7 million a year. And you'll see on a future slide, right now, that surplus is running at around $8 to $10 million a year. So mathematically, if it was the desire of the Board of Education to do that, and it could maintain its $8 to $10 million non-capital structural surplus, there is a path to do that if it is the will of the board. Next slide, please. So as I just mentioned, the district currently has a non-capital surplus of about $8 to $10 million. It was a little over, again, it was $12.4 million last year, but that number was inflated partially because the cost of providing education virtually is less expensive than face-to-face. So most districts had their expenditures less than what they historically would be. And then secondly, has to do with the timing of how some of the tax collections came in. So we believe that the structural surplus is somewhere closer to $8 to $10 million currently. So from a mathematical perspective, if the district were able to maintain future, this is a simple statement, but it's a relevant statement, is that if the district were able to maintain future expenditure growth at or below future revenue growth, it would be able to maintain the level of the annual non-capital surplus. So in other words, if your revenue, if you were able to, and again, it's not just revenue growth, it also is expenditure growth. So you have two levers to have to balance that growth rate. You could drop expenditures, you could raise revenues. If you can match your expenditure growth to your revenue growth, then that $8 to $10 million surplus will exist so long as you can do that. And it would allow you to do those things if you desired to happen. Now, the ability to maintain those $8 to $10 million structural non-capital surpluses would be determined by the decisions made at the board level. And primarily, as I mentioned previously, the tax levy and cost of labor. Those are the two primary levers. The district certainly has some ability to lower expenditures through non-salary benefit efficiencies if it can do that. But in terms of the big dollar impacts, those are the two decisions that will determine the future of that non-capital structural surplus number. Next slide, please. So I kind of just showed, but this is an example of how it would look over the next 10 years. So let's say hypothetically the district were able to maintain a $7 million non-capital surplus every year. And it decides, and it averages, obviously it wouldn't look exactly like that, but it averages $11 million a year, which is that $110 million of total major capital expenditures. You could see that each year, the non-capital surplus is 7 million, it spends 11 million, its fund balance decreases by $4 million every year. So over 10 years, its fund balance will decrease by $40 million, which again would be aligned with the board's target of decreasing its fund balance reserves from $80 million down to $40 million. That's how that $40 million of fund balance reserves would be used to fill the hole because capital expenditures were higher than the non-capital surplus. And again, this is just one example. Next slide, please. So the three key takeaways are that the board should first establish their goals related to fund balance, reserve targets, and desired level of capital expenditures. I believe that's critical. Where does the Board of Education want to go? That's got to be the long-term vision as you're making your decisions, whatever those decisions are. Secondly, is that the board needs to determine once it does that, what's the non-capital surplus target it should have to do that, whatever that is. And then third, the board needs to be committed to making its major financial decisions to ensure that that non-capital surplus target is met. And again, absent the district, I believe, controls its financial future. You're in a position that you have a lot of influence over what's going to happen over the next 10 years. But the decisions, should be the decisions that you're making right now are critical to how they affect everything in your district over the next 10 years. So that kind of, I think as we put this together and blended it with Ron's presentation at the beginning, I think it's kind of hopefully sets the framework so that discussions can be had how you want to proceed going forward. And with that, I complete my presentation.
Thanks. I think we have a question from Kabrib related to finances, I'm assuming. Kabrib?
Actually, it's kind of, I'm a little frustrated with this whole, what we're doing tonight. And here's why I'm a little annoyed. So when I first expressed interest, because Fred brought it up, I think 2 board meetings ago, have a discussion still on facilities. I thought that's what we'd be doing, talking facilities. We've had a financial discussion before. The committee's talked about it before. I'm on the finance committee, and our numbers or actual projections for a 5-year and 10-year period, I believe, and we discussed that. And we're now an hour and 15 minutes into it. We get to talk about facilities and what the needs are. So my thought was we would discuss what is being proposed, what is necessary, what it means. We need to do this part, and then do financial, because we did not discuss facilities tonight. And somehow this turned into discussion about the pool, not here, but other things. And we did not look at each item of 10-year plan, what we need to do, and future plans. I don't know what we're doing here. I feel like we wasted time here tonight. I'm just sorry. I feel like we wasted time because we did not talk about facilities. This was a facilities special meeting. I'm not saying any one person is to blame, but it's frustrating because when Fred, I'm not going to talk with Fred, but when he said, hey, let's talk facilities, go through what's needed, I thought we would do that. and it's 6:46 and we have not done that yet. So I'm not sure what the objective was tonight. Because my thought process was we discuss what the needs of the school are, the building, and what is necessary to happen right now. Maybe discuss project 2 if necessary, or how they overlap. And then we can have a financial discussion about how we fund what we think we should be funding. So I don't know. I will, that's all I have.
Dr. Johnson, I don't know if you want to respond to that or if we should go to, I know that obviously Fred and Ralph also have their hands up.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to respond to that if you want me to right now, but I'd also would be interested to hear not only Kareem's take on that, which is useful, but from other board members as well. I'll be happy to speak to the intent of the meeting tonight and what kind of mindset we had going in for sure. But let's hear from other board members if we could.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Fred?
Yeah, I hear exactly what Kareem is saying, and I may articulate it a little bit differently. My thought process, and I thought our intentions tonight was to revisit or to visit our processes for the long-term facility maintenance master plan, and how it should look, what the process should be to develop it, and how we move forward. I'm pretty disappointed in this document that's attached called the Update on Facilities Master Plan, and I'm disappointed primarily because of, and I'll echo what my friend John Duffy said. In this document, I don't see anything, all right, that refers to the whole premise of the Imagine process. And remember, when we went into the Imagine process, that was a master's facilities plan. I don't see the term need-based. I don't see the term student-focused, and I don't see anything having to do with equity evaluation or an equity lens. And that's very concerning to me. Especially on page 3 of this document, where a paragraph starts with, additionally, the following notes help to explain how the plan was developed. In none of those 3 core processes of the Imagine program have been evaluated, right, in the creation of this document. Right. We've gone through and we continue to get from the administration separate plans. And now we've got a third. We've got the furniture and equipment. However, there needs to be one integrated plan, all right? Because you risk overlapping. And just an example, we're talking about doing roofs, but if we're going to be in 2 to 3 years taking down a portion of the building, why would we invest in a roof on that portion? All right, those things need to be integrated. It has to be under one umbrella, and we have to implement at the highest benefit for our students. And things need to be sequenced together. Now, I understand within this plan, you're going to have some different, you might have some different priorities. And the way I see them is you would have visionary needs for the educational, athletic, and activity needs of our students. All right, and then you have the current and future infrastructure needs. All of those things that we talk about, regular maintenance things, whether it's air handlers or whatever it might be. But they have to work in concert with each other. And it's kind of like looking through a pair of binoculars, where you have to kind of independently, each eye, you have to focus to get a clear picture. That's kind of the analogy that I would like to use. I believe that we do need to go forward with revisiting and reevaluating Project 2. Those needs that were identified in Project 2, all right, by Imagine, all right, were the most critical needs. We surpassed those. We passed those up to do Project 1, all right, which was based on more on equity, all right, and the social emotional needs of our students, all right. But we see these physical needs in Project 2. Now we have a new set of eyes in the athletic department, we have a very young, very progressive athletic director who may look at things differently, all right, and we need to get her input, all right, as what things should look like, all right. We need to redo this, all right. I'm not saying start from scratch with Project 2, but I am saying that there needs to be a revision, a relook, all right. I would not take Project 2 out right now to bid for construction, right? Because I think we're 3 years down the road. I want to know if how our needs analysis, how our look in our lenses through equity, all right, would change, right? And I think that's the first step. I think, financially, that comes second to me. All right. We obviously have to have a hold on our finances, but I'm hearing things that I've never heard before tonight in terms of our finances. And I have a lot of questions about those, but I'm going to withhold them probably to a later date. But I don't understand how we have such large surpluses outside, you can call them the capital surpluses. However, but how do we have that, and what does that really mean? What expenses have been offsetting those over the years? There's a lot of questions that go into that. But I think for tonight, what I was hoping to see, all right, was a path forward on how our process ought to work moving forward as we want to look at Project 2, all right, and incorporating and integrating, which hasn't happened, which I thought was going to happen in 2019, though all of those other routine or current infrastructure needs into one plan. And that's really what I kind of was envisioning this meeting to be. And I also, one of the things I didn't see, and I don't know if it's incorporated in there, is those additional 2 flights of classrooms that were left off of Project 1. And I don't know if they're included in any of those numbers that we were given, or where they stand. I know I don't think we've gotten the costs, the costings of those yet. But that's how I envision this kind of process. I would like to see an outline of a process of how we move forward with all of this.
Thanks, Fred. Greg, should we move to Ralph? Okay. Ralph?
Yeah, hi, Sarah. First, I want to, thank Dr. Johnson and the team for putting together a bunch of information. I know that you had a short time period to do this, but I think this is a cart and horse issue. And it really isn't what I had in mind when I requested a special meeting on facilities. And I know Fred backed me up on that request, and I appreciated that from Fred. So I don't want to be redundant, but I want to say what I envisioned was a thorough discussion of the facilities elements contained in the Imagine plan. Those done, those that weren't done, and the basis behind them. And then I wanted to see those facility discussions and need identification and the reason for the need identification mapped out against what we knew our capital maintenance program would be over the next 10 years. To understand how there was some overlap and how there was some completely different aspects, particularly to the Imagine plan, because to the extent there are overlap, I mean, I appreciate taking the path where when you gave us some of the financial information, you basically said, well, because, and let's pick on a topic that's not at all controversial, because there's a pool in the Imagine plan, we took out the capital maintenance cost on the pool. Well, frankly, what I would like to see is, here's how Imagine envisioned that one renovation. Here's what it would accomplish. Here's the facilities. Here's the rationale behind it. We didn't do Imagine from a capital maintenance standpoint. Here's what we have to do with those pools because they are leaking. They're causing these problems. Here's what the code is. Here's what it would cost to bring them up to code if that were possible, right? And then I would understand whether or not the Imagine approach to creating a new facility for the pool is a better approach for our students, for our students' needs, for our taxpayers, than just doing the capital program. So what I really wanted first was, let's understand our facilities needs, both our maintenance needs and these proposals for Imagine. Let's understand the philosophy behind them. Let's, as a board, coalesce around which facilities approach is the one we want to adopt, and then start figuring out if this is really the best way to go. What are the costs and all those other things, and adding them to it. Now, cost would always be part of the discussion in my mind, and I just have to say I was a little confused by some of the cost projections project that you were given, so that we were given in the materials. I'll note on, I think it's slide 5, for instance, FY21 annual spending on 10-year maintenance plan was identified as 7.6 million. And then if you go to the more detailed slide, it's not that amount. It is in fact 8.5. So maybe it's the addition of soft costs, maybe there's a differential, but to me, seeing two different numbers for the purportedly the same activity in the same year was confusing and didn't make sense. And so if we're going to do, I do think we need to have the dollar amounts attached to the different facilities things. And I'm guessing, Greg, and I don't know if this is true, on the project 2, if we have a cost basis for the pool, the 14 million, I'm assuming we have a rough estimate of the other roughly estimated costs for the other different aspects of that program, right? So they could be broken out that the locker rooms are $8 and the toilets are $9, you know what I mean? So that we could understand all that too in context. And then really the capital maintenance plan, you know, I would also have wanted to have highlighted the things we absolutely positively had to do. And if we did project 2, did that obviate any of the things we needed to do in our capital maintenance plan in project 1, or did it change it? I mean, Fred hit one of the things that I had a question about when I looked at it. You know, do we need to do the whole roof if we do project 2, or should we do something else, or et cetera? So I wanted that facilities discussion to really understand our facilities needs, both from a capital maintenance standpoint and from what the Imagine plan set forth. I wanted to understand the philosophy behind them. I wanted to have a handle on the differentials and the costs and the overlap, so that then we could have a second and third meeting as a board where we talked about all these things together and the philosophy to the investment, and made more informed decisions on the best way to go. So that is what I envisioned, and I will take heat if I didn't make that clear in my request for a discussion on this, because I was the one asking for it. And so if I was unclear, my bad. And I feel a little guilty that the administration went through doing a bunch of work that ended up being somewhat off point to what I had envisioned. So I will take my share of the blame for that, and maybe not being as clear as I could have been in the request, but I want you to understand what I envisioned for the process. That's all.
Just really quickly to clarify one point, because it's quick and easy and it's important. What you see in slide 5 that you referenced, the cost differences that you saw, Ralph, the 7.6 or around 7.7 that you see for fiscal year 21 and the 10-year maintenance plan is amount spent. That is the audited firm amount spent for fiscal year 21. What you see in the 10-year maintenance plan, it's never gone back and shored up for exactly what has been spent. Those exist as projections to figure out what our spend is. So they're two different
So
ways.
it's comparing a budgeted amount to an actual amount?
It is comparing a projected amount to because if you take a look at years beyond 21, for
All right.
example, you're way
Well,
down
that's-
the road.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's do this.
Yep.
I couldn't reconcile it and I didn't see language to that effect. So just making that clear is great. And I appreciate that, Greg. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you all for putting the information together. What I'm a bunch of my fellow board members have said what I was thinking also. But one of the pieces I just want to bring just forward again and reemphasize is every time we have a conversation about the Imagine plan, we have discussed repeatedly and in our conversations about Project One, like things that could be done, what had to be done, and what needs to be done, and what we must do. And I think that we need to revisit that conversation, but I would really love to revisit that conversation in a way that we're looking at actual financials. So this is what we need, this is what we must do, and this is how much it's going to cost, and this is how we're going to fund it. I would love for us to be that specific, because hypothetical situations don't get me the information I need to make an informed decision. Although I appreciate the way that was all laid out, it just was not specific enough for me. And also, what I appreciated seeing in the report so much, though, what I did like was I did see how it connected to what students could utilize. It did connect to how it's going to impact the experience of our students on a regular basis. It did not necessarily speak to how we're equalizing opportunities. So I would like to see more of that when we have those conversations. And lastly, we scheduled this meeting from 5:30 to 7. And I know that it was a very challenging thing for us to do, to schedule this special meeting in addition to our other meetings. And so my time is very limited tonight, and so I will not be able to stay for much longer. But I just would like, we spend a lot of time in meetings having conversations. I just would like for us to be as clear with our time expectations as we can be, especially when we schedule something in addition to what we're already doing. And lastly, if we hear a lot of feedback from the community about information that is not always accurate, that does not sound like what we're saying, what we're doing, what we're considering, or what we're even going to be discussing for the evening. And I would love for us to work more, and I know we've talked about this as a board, but I love that transparency came up, because I do feel that in at least my years on the board, we've been extremely transparent, as well as quite good fiduciaries with taxpayer dollars. I would love for us to get even more clear on our information that we share and how we share it, because the misinformation is really challenging to hear right now. So thank you. That's all I've got.
And then Marianne.
Can you hear me? A lot of what I would say has been said, so I will keep my comments somewhat short. Ralph, I know you I believe asked, and I, you asked for a comprehensive capital plan, and this is not a comprehensive capital plan. It's a capital plan that restates what our maintenance needs are, and I think there were improvements made in how that's been shown, which is positive. So appreciate the effort there. if the ask is that we want to relook at or bring back in Project 2, I'm 100% behind that, but I'm behind it under the context that Fred said. It's not bid out Project 2, but it's open up Project 2 and start looking. I mean, actually it was May 2020 was when, the administration was to come forth with its plan for Project 2. Obviously, a lot has happened, namely a pandemic, so that has been pushed. And I think we're now saying we need to relook at Project 2, but under the context of what the needs are, and it needs to be mapped into what the needs are of our capital plan. Part of that means, looking at it from what was done in Project 1, what was not done in Project 1, and just I guess a reconciliation on that. And I guess I'm going back to Kabrib's initial comment. That's not about the money, it's about the work and about the needs. Just to start with that, because that we need to know what it is that we need to do, and then we need to determine how we can fund it and that. And I appreciate the energy and effort to at least thinking forward, but it really starts with the need. So I'm in support of reopening Project 2 and the needs with the intent that it be, what is it that we need to do, and how does it then fit into the overall work that needs to get done. I think others said most everything else. I mean, I do appreciate, and I know it causes all kinds of misinformation, confusion, but this quote unquote surplus thinking is the recognition that we need to be spending money every year to keep our facility in order. And it needs to be part of our commitment to a balanced budget. So that's a critical part, but I go back to, we need to understand what the next level of needs are. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Tom. Marianne?
Yes, and I will try to also be brief. Things I liked out of this presentation, I appreciated Ron's overview of the map and the various levels, what would be happening at each level under the Imagine plan. That was helpful to me, getting more of a nitty-gritty sense of that. I agree with my fellow board members that what I would like going forward is to get a better understanding of the students' facilities needs right now, with an equity lens in place. And the cost of needed repairs, especially with this week, the West Pool had to be closed because of maintenance issues. So clearly we have to spend some money soon on some of these facilities needs, physical education facilities needs. And I also, as part of this presentation, I learned that the performing arts program is also, the green room for that space is also in here. And so I think making some of this clearer to everyone in terms of like, what is the scope of Imagine Project 2 is, I think that would be helpful. And then, so sort of like a min-max, like here's like, this is if we do the absolute minimum, to just keep everything from falling apart, it's still going to cost this much. And then this is what Imagine recommended, and then have a conversation about those specifics. And maybe we don't get to do everything, maybe we do, wait and see. The financial piece I found really repetitive, of things that we've covered in earlier board meetings. And I'm sorry, like it's not that it's not accurate and useful, but I think that we've said much of it before. And the one piece that I'd like to be sure is in when we get to the finance conversation, which I agree should be later, is maybe making clear what is an appropriate reserve. We need to maintain an appropriate reserve in case of emergency, in case of state funding being cut, whatever. And so I'd like to be sure that that's made clear to the public, here is a recommended percentage, et cetera. And we've discussed all of that before, but when we talk about the financial piece again, I just want to be sure that stays in there, because I think often the community thinks like, oh, you should, I mean, I believe someone said that in the public comments that we shouldn't have any reserve. And that's just a misunderstanding, right? So we need to be really clear. That would be dangerously fiscally irresponsible to have no reserve, right? So they don't want us to do that, actually. Much of this, and this is sort of a general comment to administration, is that much of this seems reactive to often inaccurate community perceptions. And I understand the impulse to react in this way, but I'm going to urge administration to resist that, because we have limited time and we've got a lot to get done. And, framing the conversation and spending a lot of time on the pieces of it that aren't even relevant or accurate is frustrating. And I had one last thought regarding Gina's point regarding board time and the difficulty of scheduling additional full board discussions. It was very hard to find a time when all of the board could be available for this. And Ron, I don't want to put you on the spot, so feel free to say this is impossible, whatever, but I had a thought, which is, if you could perhaps record little 10-minute videos of like, here's where we are with this piece of the facilities, and here's where we are with this piece, or write it up as a report or something like that. But I something that we can review in advance, so that when we come to the meeting, you don't have to try and convey all of that information in the board meeting and then have us have a discussion afterwards. It just might be more efficient. So, and I realize, board, I just assigned you all potentially more homework, but at least it's flexible homework that you can do, at other times. So, so hopefully that's better. So, okay,
Marianne, that's a university professor thing. I'm just going to record this and then you can watch it later. I hear you.
I know. Honestly, this is what I would do with my students. I'd be like, all right, you guys, you wanted to go into like Marxism in more depth. Fine. I'm going to record a 15-minute thing for you. Watch this, and then we'll come back and talk about it next week. So, so yeah, this may not be appropriate, but I just wanted to throw that out there as a suggestion. Okay.
Thanks, Ben.
I just want to really quickly just address what Marianne said. So on the finance committee, part of our discussion action items are to discuss what's an appropriate fund balance percentage, 25 to 75%, what's the actual number. That's what we discussed last board meeting, as well as creating more, a clear-cut decision or framework of when it's appropriate to take on debt, right? So that's a separate conversation, which led me to my frustration here. It's just because this was supposed to be facilities, not to knock anyone. Ron, you did what you did. We asked you, I think, but our conversation didn't even touch much on what Ron even presented. We got more to finance, and then we just lost. It just just fell apart, right? In my opinion. So I wanted to really talk more with Ron about what facilities project, that's what he's doing. But we started talking about finances, right? But it showed the whole meeting, my thought, just what Fred said or even Ralph said, it was about facilities. And we heard not a lot from Ron at all. And that was supposed to have been my thought was the process. But yes, Mary, so we actually are taking that in a separate committee, which is why we have these committees. I think we should really allocate time for discussion at each board meeting or committee meeting for the topic that's appropriate, and not combine them as a knee-jerk reaction, as Marion put it. So that's it.
So I just want to say that I know how hard Dr. Johnson and his staff worked on this presentation this evening, and that any swing and miss was absolutely not intentional on their part, and probably is a lack of clarity from the board. And I think it's incumbent on us, if we're reviewing materials and we recognize that this might not be the direction we want the conversation to go in, we should, let's email Dr. Johnson and let him know that, the priorities that we want to focus on, because I really strongly believe that this was a misunderstanding on their part and not any intent to present what they felt they should be presenting over what we wanted them to present. Because contrary to one of our public commenters, this conversation tonight was entirely driven by the board. This was the direct request of the board. We assigned ourselves another meeting. We figured out a very inconvenient time for everyone, at the expense of all of our significant others. And one 8-year-old who is still waiting for his heart-shaped chocolate brownie at home. So, you know, this obviously was not intended to be not what the board was looking for. So I just want to remind us all as board members, let's let Greg know if we see something going a direction that we didn't anticipate or what weren't hoping for. I will say we do have different tools in our toolkit now than we had, you know, back in 2018 with Imagine, and we do have additional challenges, of course, from the pandemic, but we now have the CFC, which is Kabrib made a point that I wanted to make, is that that is their role, is to look at fund balance, you know, what our comfortable fund balance level should be, what our target should be, and then also when we take on debt. So I think that that's great, and I do think that's where that conversation belongs. But maybe we need to have sort of an Imagine work group light that kind of takes a look at some of our students' needs and priorities in light of the changing circumstances of the pandemic, so that we can revisit and make sure that they still align with what is in the best interest of our students, which is why we all are here this evening at 7:17 on Valentine's Day. So I want to apologize to all of you and all of your families for having you here tonight. I will take responsibility for that one, so I'm sorry. Ralph, did you want to add something?
Yeah, you know, Sarah, you know, like I said, it could have been me being unclear in my request to Greg, so I took that hit. But I do want to say I don't want an Imagine light happening out of the boardroom. I want the facilities discussion happening here. I want to understand the Imagine rationales here. I want to discuss through the equity lens here. I want to discuss the changing needs here in a facilities discussion. I don't want anything being done by a committee and coming back. I want it done at the board level.
So Ralph, then help me.
Because we don't have a lot of time to do this. And so we need to, as a board, really understand everything that went into Imagine. We've got a board member here, correct me if I'm wrong, that was intimately involved with Imagine, right? Fred, weren't you part of that?
I was a liaison and an observer.
But you're pretty
not a
comfortable that you
contributor.
understood what was going on. You
Yes.
feel pretty comfortable, right? So you
Absolutely.
can certainly fill us in on what the priorities were, what the philosophy was, whatever. And then, you know, the changing needs of the students. I mean, obviously in a pandemic, I mean, that's something we've been talking about all the time. If you feel a need to survey the kids some more, I'm okay with that. But I just want the discussion at the board level. I want us all on the same page. This is a big issue. It's an expenditure of tens of millions of dollars over an extended period of time. And we all need to understand the rationale behind making these decisions. And we all need to be comfortable with those rationales. And we all need to be convinced we're doing it in the best interests of the community we serve, both the school itself and the larger stakeholders that attend or have family attending the school and live in the community.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if there's, all right, if I can just jump in for a minute, Sarah, is that all right? Unless there are other board members who want to continue to contribute before I do so. I see Fred, your hand is raised, for example. I want to make sure that's current.
I just wanted to kind of respond a little bit to Ralph. I agree with what Ralph has to say in terms of decision making. But I also, in the fact that I saw the 18 months of work that was done by the Imagine group, you know, the board doesn't have the bandwidth to do all of that kind of work. Yes, the decision making, absolutely, but the reporting needs to come to the board. You know, the leaders of the Imagine group are still in this community. They're still very supportive of the work. But I can tell you that, and with some of the discussions I've had with our athletic director, you know, there may be some needed revisions. And Ralph pointed it out because of the pandemic, all right, because of different needs that may have evolved. And I'm not sure that's work that we do at the board table and whether we have the bandwidth to do that. You know, I'm
No, but
certainly
that's
willing
just
to do
getting
it.
information to present to the board, Fred. I mean, the
Right.
discussion
No,
needs
that's
to
what
happen at the
I'm
board
I'm
level.
agreeing with you on the
Yeah.
decision-making portion of it.
No, I appreciate that, Fred, and I think that's right. But I mean, that's just getting additional information for our discussion. And frankly, I don't know what you think about it, Fred. One of the thoughts I've had is during this facilities discussion, maybe getting a few of the leaders from the Imagine plan that really worked on it to come in and talk about, you know, all that other stuff that they went through at, you know, with the board. So we really get to understand their decision-making process and their priorities and all those other things. I think that would be a value add to the board and help us in our decision-making process.
100% agree with you, Ralph.
Yeah, I'll agree as well. I think it was one of the Imagine people several years ago when I was asking about this phase 1 stuff, took the time to walk around the park with me and talk me through it, and it was incredibly helpful. So.
Yeah, if I can, I'm just going to jump in for a second. So clearly, clearly the feedback from the board is pretty clear. It's right here. And so it's not lost. I understand that. And we will continue to discuss how we can bring a more kind of needs-based argument based off of where we are with the Imagine process to the board for conversation, so you can really see what those students' needs are, those equity-based students' needs are that are driving this work for Project 2. I hear that loud and clear. To the extent that we miss that mark, that's on me, and I want to be very clear with the board on that. That's on me. That's not on Ron or any member of that team. I want to clarify, though, one part of this. The 10-year maintenance plans, as I said in my initial comments, the 10-year maintenance that you see has to absolutely exist as part of one comprehensive approach. That's really what we are trying to communicate here. Clearly, for some board members at least, that didn't hit the mark. But I think the single most significant way that the 10-year maintenance plan over the last several years has not been able to, it looked like it's been decoupled from the Imagine process, is that it included components that were redundant with it in a lot of ways. And removing those redundancies is absolutely an essential step. There are elements of that 10-year maintenance plan that have to continue to go on regardless of what happens with anything related to Project 2. And this is, that 10-year maintenance plan is merely, or actually completely designed to communicate what those needs are. So there's that. I think once we get a feel for what we want to do for Project 2, what is its scope, what needs are we exactly trying to meet with that, then I think we'll be better situation to figure out that cost, figure out those cost benefits, or those balances between how we want to deal with the various ways we could potentially fund it. And then that will have an implication on how we go about carrying out the 10-year maintenance plan for sure. So it certainly will be adjusted once we figure out what we're doing for these major capital projects. There's no doubt about that. It is a work in process, but to a certain extent, those lists of needs will always exist a little bit independently of large capital projects, especially one like this that is defined in a specific area of the building. That is removed from, the vast majority of the square footage that we currently have. But what I do hear is the need for a more needs-based conversation, as I said, and we will take this feedback happily, and we'll retool and bring it back to the board. Okay.
Yeah, and Greg, do you mind if I follow up on what you just said? Because it's in direct response. And so I love what you just said. And I really value your work and all the effort you put into this, Greg. So please don't ever take any of this as sniping at you. That's never intended to be the case. And if I come off that way, it's just because I'm a cranky old man. But the truth of the matter is those redundancies we need to know. We need to know. So we need to see a maintenance plan that would exist if none of Project 2 or 3 or 4 or 17 ever happened, because we need to understand what essential maintenance operations have in fact been co-opted into this process. And then we need to be able to evaluate whether it's a better process this way. And to Tom's point, and Tom, I guess is what I thought would be happening, but it ties into what Greg said. You know, we need to discuss whether or not project 2 is going forward, or whether or not project 3 goes forward, or whether or not project 3 moves ahead of project 2, or whether or not everything gets changed or mix matched based on our current needs, our 10-year maintenance plan, and the rationale behind those elements of the Imagine plan. So we just need to have a resetting discussion that's comprehensive, which is why I want to do that at the board level. So everybody's in on the discussion and there's no questions to ask. We all hear the same information at the same time, get to process it together, get to talk it out together, and get to collaboratively with the administration work out a great way to go forward. I think that that's why I want it all done at the board level.
Has patiently had his hand up. Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing as I'm reflecting on this dialogue. When the Imagine work was originally being done, as I remember, there was a lot of concern because that work was done really totally just based on needs, and there was no dollars. It's like, let's not put the dollars on the table, let's define the needs. And I can tell you, I was very, apprehensive at that time. Today, it's kind of like the tables have turned and it's like, here's the dollars that we can do, or they came into the discussion early. And I think the reality is we need to balance the two. We need a needs-based discussion, but we also, and that's what the CFC can support, we also need to understand how we can afford and finance and do that in a balanced way. That's my perspective.
And I'll just add, I'm thinking back to when D97 went to referendum and Sarah Spivey, not Sarah Spivey, sorry, Sarah, it wasn't you. One of the board members came to my house and, hosted a community event where she went through a presentation to explain to us, point by point, here are the needs, here's the needs. And then this would have been the least expensive option. That would get us this much. This is a middle road. This is a high road kind of thing. I think part of what I'd like out of this long term, so just as a broad-based thing, long term, I'd like to be able to do that same kind of explaining to the community when we get to that stage, right? Of this was the need for this piece of it, right? We are trying for the pool. We are trying to satisfy the swim teams, but also all of these other physical education, water related needs and why. And a lot of this is on the page that you linked to. So I think the information is there, but it's kind of buried from my point of view right now for many of the other aspects. And so long term, I'd like it to be in a very coherent, like this was the need, it's the acute need, and then these were our options, and then this is what we decided to go with, and then on to the next thing, because it is very frustrating seeing such skewed and inaccurate information out in the community, and I want to be able to confidently be able to give them accurate information. So, all right.
Greg, do you feel as though you have the appropriate direction that you need for the next time we have a meeting on facilities?
Yes, I believe I have a lot of feedback from the board. As we move forward and we think about how we're going to package this for future conversations, we will be looking for further feedback from the board before we bring this forward for that full conversation. But to get started with that process, I think Allison, Ron, and I, and everybody who's here in this call have quite a bit to digest. So thank you.
All right, folks, I suggest that at this point we adjourn the meeting. And again, thank you.
So moved. So moved.
Second.
All right, any opposed?
Right.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you for your
Thanks.
time.